Hello, I'm Brooke, and I'm here to talk about traveling for heritage and genealogy. Now, my business, I'm Outta Here Travel, has a keen interest in helping people discover other cultures and doing a little bit more of a deep dive. And one aspect of that might be traveling to figure out more about your heritage and learning more about what makes you you. What countries did your ancestors come from? Now, a couple weeks ago, I got invited by my local genealogical society to do this presentation in person, so I figured I'd just make a recording and put it up as a YouTube video. So here we go, talking about the best ways to think about and the best practices to travel to discover your past. So as I did the presentation there, just coming up with an agenda of the things I would be talking about in the meeting. You can see the list there. I'm not going to go through all of them, but what heritage travel is, again, it's just like regular travel, except adding on another layer. So you can see here, I have a couple examples of photos over on the right side. One is an Asian village. The other one looks to be more like an Alpine village. And one of the things I like saying is that heritage travel is not specific to a certain culture. Now, in full disclosure, there are some cultures that are easier to do heritage travel in, but no matter who you are and what your background is, there's an aspect of heritage travel that you can pursue. And so I'm just going to go through some of these. In the end, I'll talk about how I can help you out if you want to plan a trip like this. All right, so first of all, defining what heritage travel is. Like I said, this is the same as regular travel, except with a little bit more focus. So you might already like to travel internationally or worldwide. This is just adding on an extra layer and maybe visiting some of the areas that your ancestors came from. Now, your ancestors may have come from various parts of the world. Maybe you have connections or ties to just one country. Maybe they came over to the United States a long time ago. Maybe they came over to the United States more recently. It doesn't matter. But if you have an idea of where you want to go, this might just give your trip that little bit extra layer of interest where you can go and talk with some of the offices and some of the cemeteries and some of the libraries and so on and so forth to figure out what their life was in those places at those times. So, like I say, it's especially interesting to do things like this if your ancestors lived in an entirely different environment or culture than where you grew up. So it's just an interesting contrast, especially trying to keep in mind now, of course, if you go to a pineapple plantation now, the pineapple plantation that your great grandfather came from over 100 years ago, it's not quite the same. So you have to do a little bit of that imagination in your mind's eye, but it kind of gives you an idea. So, for instance, I think it's more interesting to say, oh, I want to go and look at a farm in Ireland and experience it rather than just, writing down on a piece of paper, Grandma Mary came over from Ireland in 1920 from a farm. I mean, that's great information to have, but bringing it to life by actually going and seeing what their life may have been like at the time. I think that's just so exciting to think about. And my other point here is more likely to include smaller towns than big cities. A lot of times when we plan trips to just travel without the heritage component, we'll plan a trip to a city. Oh, I want to go on a trip to Paris and London and Amsterdam. And that's great for sightseeing. And I don't want to discourage you from doing that by any means, but just as a spoiler alert, I guess, if you're looking for your ancestors, there may be some deeper diving to do in smaller towns, which of course have the charm of their own. So there's good parts that are different in both the bigger towns and the smaller towns. What you might find in some of the smaller towns might be a little bit more of a language barrier. So just something to keep in mind. A lot of the big cities of the world, you'll have varying degrees of English, but you'll at least probably find some English spoken. So yeah, just bringing your records to life that you have. Now, I'm not a genealogist. I will fully admit that. But as I said at the top, I love helping people learn more about cultures that are not their own and doing a deeper dive through travel. Now, this is a kind of a culture that is your own, but it's also not, right? Because you may have been living in the United States or Canada or whatever your home country is, and that's all you know other than maybe traveling a little bit. So, exploring their family story in a different country, so it is kind of your own, but the day-to-day life is not your own. So that's what I love about all of this. My company is called I'm Outta Here Travel, bespoke travel planning company, meaning that I plan itineraries that are tailored exactly to your wants and your needs. My planning experience ranges all over the world. I have been to 34 countries. I've been to 50 states. That said, that doesn't mean I've been to the country that you might be interested in for your heritage travel. But my experience, especially since I've been to a lot of small towns, will help you get to where you want to go. So, about this, I love this quote: all journeys have secret destinations of which the traveler is unaware. Because whether you're doing just your ordinary travel or heritage travel, there's going to be some serendipity, right? So, from the heritage travel perspective, if you have all your records that you're bringing with you, and your records say, oh, we need to go to the small village in Normandy in France to find this particular lineage of your family. But what about if you get over there and you find some records on site that are a little bit different? Or better yet, there's sometimes you can go to some of the small local businesses that have been around for generations. Like maybe you go and sit at a bar or a cafe or something like that. You start a conversation with the owner or someone working there. And of course, they're probably younger than your ancestors, but they may know your family line. They could say something like, for example, okay, your record said Normandy, but in reality, I know that family came from Brittany, which is a little bit farther west in France. So just something like that could happen. Being serendipitous about it, leaving room, time, and space for that serendipity, and also just leaving that mental space for the serendipity too. Because I think that's part of what makes travel fun. You go over there, you think you're going to do A, B, C, and D, and then all of a sudden someone throws in something from left field and you end up doing Z also. And that's okay because that's part of what makes travel interesting. This travel, heritage travel specifically, is perfect for genealogy buffs, like the group that I spoke with a couple of weeks ago. Like I was saying, it adds the context to the records that you already have. So the example I gave about the farm, also just things like maybe maybe your uncle or aunt told you something about, oh, your grandpa grew up in the Philippines and he worked on a pineapple plantation. That's interesting, but it becomes even more exciting if you can go over there, spend some time in a pineapple plantation, and maybe if you're lucky, some of the locals or some of the owners might have some insight into what the pineapple plantation would have been in the past. So that allows you to just fill in those gaps. Something like that may not fill in another line in your family tree, but I just think it's interesting nonetheless, making a connection to locals, which we like to do when we travel anyway, but this just helps that along. It actually gives you an icebreaker too, because sometimes when we go to a foreign country, especially one that is not a native English speaking country, we feel a little shy to talk to some of the locals. Like, what would they want to talk to an American like me or something like that? But if you go over there and say, my great grandfather came from this town, that just provides you a talking point there. And again, some people might be able to point you in the right direction if they're a family that's been around that area for a long time. Landscapes and culture, not just I've been talking about the culture a lot, but just looking literally at the landscape where your ancestors would have been wandering every single day and just getting kind of a big picture context of that. Another point I want to make about this, just going into a little bit of the mechanics of planning a trip, beware of over preparing. Perfection's the enemy of action. I know that a lot of us, whether we're doing heritage travel or just travel in general, we have our spreadsheets, we have our pieces of paper where we want to be here, 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 here. But wait, there's another detail to plan. And then you get that detailed plan. But wait, there's another detail to plan. And then if you keep on taking the time to plan all the details, you may run out of time to actually take the trip. So if you are someone who wants to travel for heritage and genealogy, and you say, well, I want to have my entire family tree filled in before I do the trip. Is that necessarily the wisest thing to say? I say not, unless it's easy to fill in the entire family tree, and that's okay. But if you're having a challenge with the last couple of lines in your family tree, then maybe it's just as well that you go and take that trip before time gets away from you. So, speaking of research, I love this quote for so many reasons. I'm sure a lot of us have seen this quote a lot of times before. Obviously, it was not Abraham Lincoln saying it or talking about the internet, but a lot of us who've done genealogy research in the past 10, 20 years have used the internet as a resource for that, right? Because there are lots of resources for that, especially if you're unfamiliar with it. I'll bring it up later. FamilySearch.org is a free resource provided by the Latter-day Saints Church, and you can just look up all sorts of things on there. But it's just information on the internet, and a lot of it is just crowdsourced. So that means that a lot of the stuff you're looking up might not be verified, right? You might have information on your family tree, on your supposed family tree, that may not be correct. And that's what I just kind of want to get out with this, that things you find on the internet, you can't 100% believe. And also things that you don't find on the internet, you can't 100% believe either. I have a personal story like that that I'll get to in a little bit. But be just be gracious with yourself. And if you go over to whatever country or whatever place and find out that half of what you thought was your family tree that you found on the internet is actually not true, you found another branch in it that goes another direction, don't be mad. Just enjoy the fact that you're there and traveling and still getting to know where the culture of where your ancestors came from. So the mechanics, a little bit more of the mechanics of planning a trip like this. So I have kind of the wide spectrum here. Starting with someone who's really, really serious about genealogy. That's the first point. My second point is someone who's more casual about genealogy. So if you're really serious, you have your family tree all filled out, and you want to go to the specific towns where people came from, these are my suggestions to do. So perform thorough research in advance. That's one of the things I recommend because that just gives you a little bit more of a narrow focus of where you might want to go. And that could take a while, just filling out that family tree, figuring out where you need to go, and pre-schedule appointments at places you want to visit, the churches, the cemeteries, the records offices. Something with to keep in mind about that, I think I have it on a coming slide. Something to keep in mind about that is that some of these offices are not open 7 days a week, particularly in more traditional areas, or especially in Europe. There are lots of these government or records offices that'll be closed on Sunday. So make sure you know what day the places are closed or what days the places are closed so you can work around that in advance, not be disappointed, right? Because there's nothing worse than saying, okay, I'm going to be in this town from Friday through Sunday and I'll have a lot of time to work. And then you get there at 3 o'clock on Friday, realize the office that you want to go closes at 5 and they're not open Saturday, Sunday. So just knowing in advance how you need to work that schedule around is just really important. So all these things, you can plan them on your own. There are also some heritage travel companies. There are some subdivisions of travel companies that do heritage travel. I'll get more into detail on that later. So of course, if you're working with a travel planning company that gives you all the details for that, it'll be more expensive because they're providing a service for you. If you plan it on your own, that is a little bit more affordable, yet is more work on your end. There are some ways of kind of finding a hybrid of the two. That's where I like to help because I like to keep my clients independent, but I like to be a resource to help plan like a day here or a day there or some of the details. So that is if you're serious about it. You can also just casually say, oh, I'm Irish. I want to see what Ireland looks like. And you may not know the specific cities that your family comes from, but there's still a connection when you go to these countries where your heritage comes from, absorbing the culture, often more affordable. Like I say, if you're using a tour company, more spontaneous. So more spontaneous because you don't have to work around the schedules for those offices I was talking about. You're just going and kind of absorbing where your ancestors came from, more spontaneous in that way, often more affordable because you can plan it on your own a little bit more. The tour companies that just do the I'm going on a tour through Ireland type of tours, it's going to be a more affordable tour than I'm going on a tour through Ireland and I want to go to these records offices because that just involves an extra level of planning. So yeah, these are the two extremes that I pointed out there. Of course, there's a lot of in-betweens. So just figure out what you want to do before you get into this. And I recommend that if you're figuring out what you want to do, give yourself a lot of advance notice for that because the research that you're doing can take a while, right? Going online like to Family Search, that's one of the biggest resources I think of. Going to Family Search, looking up your family tree, the information generally spontaneously comes back. But what if you have to send an email or a text or something like that to a records office? And again, because they are generally closed some days or have more limited hours, you might not get a response for a week. And then you ask them another question, and then you have another week where you get a response. So you can see how getting the details in place that you want to have could take a little bit of time. So what I'm saying is, if you want to plan a trip like this, don't start doing your genealogy research in February and expect to have everything planned for a May trip. It generally takes a lot longer than that. So a little bit more into the details of a heritage trip. Like I said, plan, but don't over plan because sometimes, like I said, the time can get away from you if you're doing so much of this planning. And then you realize, oh, I wanted to go on a trip this summer or next winter, and it's already next winter, so I can't do that anymore. But also with the over planning, like I was saying earlier, sometimes if the research you got from the internet is has a little bit of a tarnish to it, and you go over to whatever area and they say, well, hey, it's this instead of what you got online. If you put a lot of your time and effort into planning really hard, then you might be disappointed of, oh, well, all that work I did didn't really get me anywhere. So it depends on your perspective on that, of course, but just don't overplan. Sometimes just going and doing it is the right thing to do. Couple things to visit before you actually do your trip using locally accessible resources before you actually head across whichever pond you're going across. A lot of people have done that. You do the cheek swab, you send your spit off to someone, and they do a DNA analysis service. Ancestry.com is one of the more common ones. Just for a baseline, I say for a baseline because I have found sometimes that the Ancestry.com 23andMe that has gone through a little bit of an upheaval. Some of those don't quite match up what you think they're supposed to match up. So there's been for me, a little bit of skepticism in getting the actual results. And a lot of the genealogy folks that I've talked with say, yeah, it's exactly right, that they don't consider it 100% gospel. They consider it a good direction to point toward, but it's not 100%. In fact, I say that from personal experience because I've seen with me and with my family's heritages, we've used the different companies and the math ain't mathing on them. That doesn't add up right. So they have access to different databases, and because of the different information in the different databases, sometimes I just think that because of that difference, it doesn't quite give you the 100% accuracy you might want. Census records, US Census records, those are accessible online, so you can find those. Some years are more detailed than others. I don't remember off the top of my head which ones are the more detailed, but some years are kind of sparse, and they just say, okay, Mary Jones was born in Baltimore in 1940, and Mary Jones died in Annapolis in 1980. That's it. But then some of the census records will go into more detail and say and give things like occupations and if they have children in their house and things like that. So just take that as you will, and you may want to look at more than one of the censuses to figure that out. I found this link a while back. Arkansas State University, random, but Arkansas State University has curated a list of immigration records, and they have that in that link. You can use that link and just take a look to see if any of these things could help you. There are all sorts of immigration records, ranging from things like prison records, which could also be part of this, prison records, marriage records, military records. Another thing that I don't remember as part of this list, but another thing that I've heard could be interesting to figure out your heritage is looking up dog registrations because the dog's owner registers the dog at their address. So you can gain some information from that. Anyway, moving along here, public libraries can help. They have access to some of the free databases that can help you figure out where your heritage lies. I live in the Seattle area, so I will use that as a reference point. I do know that the Seattle Library downtown, that fancy glass shelled one, has a genealogy librarian, and you can sign up for a free session with them. You can do it in person, you can do it online. Now, of course, I live in the Puget Sound area, and I know that would be accessible to me. I don't know if they would allow accessibility for that if you're not in like Washington State or something like that. But if you are in another area and interested, I would just say look at the libraries in some of your major cities around you and see if they have the service as well. Because that's nice as someone who's an expert in this sort of thing that can help guide you in the right direction. Because sometimes just being on your own with a computer, sometimes you feel like you get stuck. You don't know where to look next. And so someone else just talking with you can help with that. Not all records are online, like I say there. I know we've gotten used to finding a lot of things online over the past several years. And so some of us might think, oh, everything is online. But like I was saying, you may actually end up getting to your target destination and seeing in person things written. Sometimes, if you go to like the churches and things like that, they have their Bibles that have, listings of marriages, marriage records, death records, birth records that you might not be able to get from any sort of online resource. Um, and best practices for this. Like I was saying, keep in mind closures of important offices. I didn't mention holidays, but that's also another part of that. I was mentioning some of the important offices you might want to go to that have your records that you want to see, maybe closed on Sundays, maybe closed for the weekends, may have limited hours, but also local holidays. Because remember, the holidays that we have in the US are not the same holidays as other parts of the world. So just make sure you have looked up when the local holidays are and verified whether your offices are open and closed. Again, just so you don't get disappointed. Possible language barriers could be a thing, especially if working in smaller towns. Like I said, there are ways around that, so don't worry about that. You can hire a guide for the day. So I was saying you can take a tour, you can take a full tour for your whole trip, or you can just hire a guide for a day here and a day there, like a bilingual guide that can help you talk to some of the local folks if you need to. Also, a lot of us use Google Translate on our phone. That is also an option if you want. It can be a little bit more clunky, like if you type or speak something into your phone and then you show them and the back and forth can get a little clunky, but you know what? It gets the job done. Another thing about Google Translate that I want to mention with that is sometimes in these smaller towns, the internet or Wi-Fi may be a little bit spotty. If that's a concern or if it becomes a concern of yours, when you have Wi-Fi, download the library for the language of interest. So when you have Wi-Fi at your hotel or whatever, you can open up Google Translate and there's a process where you can download the library for whatever language you're interested in, and then you can use it offline, meaning you can use your Google Translate for that target language when you don't have a Wi-Fi connection. Of course, that would only be for the languages you've downloaded. So if you've downloaded French, you can use that one offline, but you can't use German if you haven't downloaded it. So just keep that in mind. Records you're looking for might not exist. Don't get disappointed by that. So if you have your heart set on, oh, I'm going to Sicily to see my great grandmother's, my some of the records from great grandparents or something like that, and to fill in some of those gaps, there's a possibility that those records don't exist. And that's okay, because if they don't exist, you're not the only one who hasn't been able to find them, right? But enjoy the trip anyway. Don't go over there and get disappointed and angry and, oh, I'm not finding the records I want, because, hey, you're still traveling. You're still experiencing the culture that your ancestors would have experienced. So you still get a lot out of that. My point there is I recommend adding in somewhere you're interested in seeing, regardless of the outcome of your research. So if you're planning like lots of little towns, like you're going to lots of little towns in whatever country, I'll just toss out Poland as an example. You're going in lots of little towns and just looking at the research in all those little towns. But I recommend if you like cities at all, tossing in a day or two in Krakow or Warsaw or one of those cities just to kind of round out your trip. And to that point, my last piece there, planning rest days, because you may be going from village to village and talking to all these people, and it's a little bit mentally tiring, right? You can get fatigued after a while. So maybe just have a day or two where you stay in your small village and just rest and relax and talk to a couple locals. Or for some people, that may be going to a city and just sightseeing and not even thinking about doing any genealogy research. It all depends on what you like. But yeah, just combining those last 2 points, planning rest days, whether that is just where you sleep in at the hotel until noon, or you just do things that are not related to genealogy at all, just figure out who you are and what that means for you. Schedule also in time to make spontaneous changes. Now, of course, if you are in Poland and they say, "Oh, well, your great grandmother actually immigrated from Turkey," obviously you aren't going to be able to make a left at Albuquerque and go there all of a sudden. But just if it's something local, you may be able to go to different villages instead. So just time to make spontaneous changes. Now, putting your plan in action. This is the final step of your planning, probably. It's not the final step because the final step is actually taking and enjoying the trip. But putting the plan in action, again, here I have your different options. You have one where you do it yourself, another option that's the other extreme where you have people do all the planning for you, and then kind of a hybrid of the two, which is mixing those, right? So option one, doing it yourself, the pros of that lower cost, but you have to do a lot of the research on your own. So that is pros and cons there. Lots of flexibility because if you go with a tour group, it may be something where you have to follow the group here and follow the group there. Whereas if you're on your own, you don't have to follow a group, you just follow yourself. So that could be a lot of planning. Like I said, it will be lots of planning. You may miss some details because if you're not a professional genealogist, having someone with a more professional background in that may help you actually figure out the little bits and pieces. Language barrier, as I mentioned, could be an issue, may not be an issue. Option two, the other extreme, going with a company. I've listed a couple of companies here: Progenealogists, American Ancestors, Heritage Tours, Pre-Planned Heritage Travel. So there are some of these companies actually that will say, hey, send us your Ancestry.com or your 23andMe results. So you take that, you send it to them, and they come up with a trip plan for you based on that. So you can do that. Of course, it'll be a little bit more spendy because that is very, very customized planning. But that's a fun experience to have, right? There are also some trips that go less into the weeds, less into the details, and they'll just kind of take a broad strokes approach to going to whatever country, Greece, Italy, whatever country is your heritage, and then saying, I'm going to just let you explore this country without too much genealogy involved, but kind of with a genealogy angle as well. So pros of this, of course, is they take care of all the details, including figuring out visas, any paperwork that you might have to do. Then you have pro-genealogists as well. The cost is also really expensive. You can take private trips. Classic Journeys, I mentioned one company that does private trips. So that is an angle that you could take. That's just you and whoever you're traveling with, your partner, your spouse, whatever, and the tour guide. So you can see that could get very, very expensive, but it's something that could be a good once in a lifetime experience. If you're not taking the private trip, if you're taking a group heritage-based trip, again, you might not be able to get to the places that you want to get to. You might not have time for the research that you want to do either. So again, there can be a combination of the two. I was mentioning earlier, just hiring a guide for a day or two here and there could be a good option where they can help break that language barrier down a little bit. They can help guide you to the proper locations. You can, with that hybrid approach, plan a lot of your own details. You don't have to have a guide every single day if you don't feel the need for that. Planning these guides, what I'm saying, usually you want to do that in advance of your trip if you want to find someone who has a heritage background. Because if you're not planning that in advance, then when you get there, the person with your right background may not be available anymore. More cost effective than doing a full trip that's planned, but it's going to be a little bit more expensive than doing everything on your own. But again, doing research to find your right local guide. Another thing that I didn't mention on one of the previous slides that I was just thinking is this heritage travel is a great opportunity for what we call in the industry multi-generational travel or multi-gen trips. That usually means you're having at least three generations from a family going, and a lot of people could be interested in that, right? So if you are that generation in the middle, you may be the one doing a lot of the planning. Your parents may come along, your kids may come along. If you are doing a multi-gen trip, that usually involves a little bit more planning because for the older generation, you want to make sure that you're dealing with any accessibility issues that they may have if they have trouble walking, if they need assistance devices, especially in smaller villages. You may have cobblestone streets or dirt roads or things like that. So there's that side of it. And the other side of it, depending on the age of the kids, they can get bored easily, right? Because what 5-year-old, for instance, is going to want to just sit there while you are going through the records in all the old Bibles and things like that? They're going to get bored. So just find places with activities that can cater to them too. Just something to think about there. So, how I can help as my travel company, as I'm Out Here Travel, I can help plan your trip from door to door. And with door to door, I literally mean door to door. I can plan the details from leaving your house to coming back to your house, including that airport transportation for your home airport. So, again, I can take care of everything like that, start to finish, complete bespoke planning. Or I can just take care of individual elements as well. Or I can do both of them. I can take care of individual elements, finding your day guides, finding your accommodations, things like that, helping guide you toward flights. And I think this approach may be better if you want to use loyalty points or miles or anything, because from a travel agent's perspective, it's challenging for us to book and use your points. I can give you guidance on which flights to choose and which hotels to choose to optimize your points, but in the end, that's better for you to actually do the booking yourself. So, but that's something I can give guidance and help with and do some of those bookings as well. Making important connections. Through my travel community, have connections all over the world. So I am happy to reach out and have a chat with some of those. And warning, it may not always come out to finding someone who is useful, but it's better than just starting with nothing that you might have. Finding the right people, guide you to the appropriate resources for your heritage, and overall, what I like to do is reducing planning stress for my clients so that you can just go and take the trip. Especially if you have spent a lot of time doing research to figure out what your heritage is, that is so much time and effort there. And then you have the additional time and effort of planning the trip on top of that. Let me help you plan the trip so that that stress goes away, that you can just go and enjoy doing the research. Now, I said I was going to tell a little personal story about how you can't always trust resources everywhere that you find. And the resource that I was struggling with when I was doing a bit of research myself was actually my grandmother telling me. So back when I was a kid in the early 80s, my paternal grandmother wrote me a letter talking about the heritage from her side, from her side of the family. Now, she had told me in this letter, again, back way before the days of the internet and email and things like that. She told me in this letter that her parents had immigrated to the United States from Finland in 1917. And that got me started with this whole narrative. So the information that you get from anywhere, you start creating stories around it, right? And some of these stories can get pretty darn exciting. So I was thinking, oh, 1917, and what was going on around 1917? World War I was getting started around 1917. So I had this whole idea of that was also the year that Finland gained independence. It was a little colony of Russia before. So I was thinking, oh, how exciting. Maybe they were sympathizing with the Russians, and they thought, okay, we better get out of Dodge before we have any trouble here. And so I had all these stories that I was coming up with. Of course, they're long since gone, so I could never ask them. My grandmother's also long since gone, unfortunately. And I had all these ideas, and it was so just creating the whole story was very exciting to me. But then when I was putting together this presentation, I started digging around in some of the databases on that side of my family, and looking, and I saw an actual marriage certificate, a copy of my great grandparents' marriage certificate from Colorado in 1914. And I thought, wait a minute. I was told they came over in 1917, not 1914. So that blew all of my exciting stories out of the water, right? I dug a little deeper and it ends up that one of them immigrated to the US in 1910. One of them came to the US in 1911. And so they didn't have they may have had similar reasons, but not quite the same reasons. A lot of people come to the US just for better financial opportunities. So that may have been just the very basic story in the end. But just letting you know that records, whether they come from online or whether they come from hearsay, just talking to some of your relatives, don't trust them 100%. They may be fine, but don't trust them 100% because then you get, like I said, I got excited. I created this whole story around it. No, that story doesn't really exist. But that's okay. I did find out that there's this one town in kind of central Finland that a lot of my family came from, and I have not been to that town. So that's given me an idea of some place that I want to visit in the future. So there you have it, kind of full circle, talking about planning heritage travel, and I'm thinking of planning some of my own in the future as well. So the services that I provide, like I was telling you before, I can provide every single planning detail of your trip. I can plan some of it, and of course, kind of a sliding scale with price, right? If I'm planning every single aspect of your trip, there's going to be a planning fee that makes it that will cost a little bit more money. There's not going to be so much of a planning fee if I don't take care of so many of the details. And with my planning, I always give the first 30 minutes complimentary to you. So that's for a couple of reasons, namely that when I start working with a client, we're not always a great fit. So I don't want you to have to pay if we have 15 minutes conversation, you realize, oh, I'm not a good fit for my business. That is great. But if you are a good fit, we can just keep on going. Additional planning, I have a fee for every 30-minute chunk after that. And I try to minimize the time needed for this. So helping you plan your fundamentals. So for my clients, I have an intake sheet where I just have you describe some of the aspects of your perfect trip. I have you tell me about hotels you've liked and trips you've liked. And so that way our conversation time is reduced. So that means that saves you money in the end and it helps me organize my planning. So that is what I do. That is how I like to help people, whether they're planning heritage travel or whether they're planning travel in general. So anytime you want to plan travel of any sort, reach out to me at I'm Outta Here Travel. I have a Facebook, I have an Instagram, I have a Pinterest, I have a LinkedIn as well, but Facebook and Instagram is probably where I'm the most active. I also have a YouTube where this is going to be living after I'm done with this presentation. My name is there. I'm Brooke Yule. I am the owner of I'm Outta Here Travel. Phone number, which can be either voice or text, whichever you prefer. And there is my email address. Now, I hope I inspired you to learn more about your heritage, whether or not you're traveling, and then maybe taking a deeper dive into those cultures. Thanks.